Hey, welcome back to Budget Magic. Well, so today I'm doing a little bit of editorializing, going to do some hot takes, and just a reminder to everybody out there, this hot take series is unique because either I'm being completely over the top serious or I'm being completely ridiculous and nonsensical, and I refuse to tell you which, so you'll just have to make up your mind on your own. I do have in mind a few other getting back to business sort of things I want to cover. There's been some shakeups with Popper. There's also some other interesting things that are going on in the world of magic finance and all this kind of stuff. But I wanted to cover just a few random things and give you an opinion. Let me know if you like this kind of stuff. If you don't like it, just thumb down the video, leave a nasty comment, and let me know that you just want me to get back to the nitty gritty budgety stuff. But if you enjoy a little sidetrack, a little rabbit trail where we discuss some other things, well, give the video a thumbs up and leave a positive comment so I can get some sense of what people think. Anyway, there's some obscure news that is worth talking about, and I want to preface this by saying I don't think you're going to get the kind of breakdown that I'm going to give you anywhere else. I think this is going to be a very unique perspective that's not going to fall neatly inside your typical sort of political or whatever you want to ideological box or whatever. Anyway, Hipsters of the Coast has published an article detailing Todd Stevens' firing from Star City Games for allegedly sexually harassing women. And also, if you dig down into the body of the article, they discuss some of the details. One of the things that's worth noting is Wizards of the Coast has not taken any action, and I believe somewhere in here he's also been suspended for, let's see here, been fired from Star City Games and suspended for 3 years from the Star City Games Open Series. I mean, who knows if Magic's even going to be around 3 years from now? I mean, it probably will, but 3 years is a long time. I mean, the difference between 1 year and 3 years is huge. The difference between 3 years and a lifetime ban, I don't know, by the time you don't play for 3 years. But the bigger thing is, what WotC is going to do, if anything. If WotC doesn't do anything, Todd Stevens can still hit the GP circuit, or I'm sorry, did I call it the GP circuit? The MF circuit. Wait, that doesn't sound right. The Magic Fest circuit. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So who knows where this is going to shake out? Anyway, if you're still wondering, like, who the heck is Todd Stevens? Well, let me fill you in. Star City Games has a series of weekly tournaments that they run. I say weekly, not necessarily every weekend, but most weekends there's a major tournament being hosted by Star City Games. This is sort of the alternative to the Magic Fest / Grand Prix events that are hosted by Wizards of the Coast. Star City Games is kind of a big deal. Their tournament results drive the prices for a lot of card singles and whatnot. Most of you are probably already familiar with this. Todd Stevens is a guy, you're not going to find his name on their leaderboard anymore, but he used to be a pretty mainstay, regular name up here in their top 16. I think last season he was number 1 on the list or something like that. I could be messing this up. I don't really follow this stuff religiously, but he's always been sort of a top contender on the SCG Tour, and Star City Games had even hired him to write articles for their site because he was, really good, and he had one of those personalities that was hard to hate for the most part. He was a pretty likable guy. I say was like he's dead. He is a fairly likable guy, at least up until this happened. Of course, sexually harassing women, kind of a big deal, especially in this day and age where that kind of stuff is a real, real hot topic to a lot of people. So, not surprisingly, a lot of people want to know more details. I'll post a link to this Hipsters of the Coast article. What you're going to find is there's really not much in the way of actual details of what actually happened. We just know that Todd Stevens has been fired and he's been banned for 3 years from the SCG circuit. And again, we don't know what, if anything, is even going to happen to him from WotC, Wizards of the Coast, as far as whether this will have any impact on his ability to attend the Magic Fest events. So, why does this matter? For most of us, it really doesn't. It is just kind of an interesting thing that happened. There's a lot of people who are rushing out to defend Todd Stevens. There's a lot of people that are rushing out to oppose those who would rush out to defend Todd Stevens. this is my take on this whole thing. So there's some other news that you'll find when you read this Hipsters of the Coast article. Most importantly, that he's been removed from Team BCW. Oh, here we go. It actually states at the time they wrote the article that Stevens was currently 9th place on the SCG Tour leaderboard. It's pretty high up there. So he didn't show up at the last Modern Open that was in Dallas this last week. He was on a relatively new-ish podcast called the Ponder Podcast, and this article states that Stevens was stepping away from the podcast. So this is actually, to me, this is a really interesting note. So for anybody who's trying to figure out what's going on here, I'm just trying to read what's going on without reading into it my own biases and whatnot, right? And basically the fact that he's stepping away from a podcast that he had at least potentially some influence over, like the stuff that Wizards of the Coast is going to do to Todd Stevens, the stuff that StarCityGames is going to do to him, he has no control over those items. However, he at least theoretically could have had some say on the podcast. He could have gone on the podcast and taken several different approaches. I mean, he could have gone on there and said, look, I'm super sorry, I made mistakes, we're a community that believes in forgiveness, right? But didn't do that. Maybe he could have gone on the podcast and could have, been ferocious, like, these are false accusations, it's a witch hunt, or whatever. But instead of doing any of these things, he's just chosen to quietly step away, and this kind of has a feel of embarrassment. Now, you could say, well, maybe the way the podcast was structured, he didn't have the final say, so maybe one of the other individuals involved, TJ Rogers, maybe had a bigger say so. But because this is being presented as Todd Stevens stepping away, Todd Stevens could come out and contest that and say, look, that's not true. They forced me out, and make a thing of it if he wanted to. And that doesn't appear to be happening. By all accounts, it looks most likely like this is just kind of a situation where Todd Stevens is embarrassed. He's not fighting it. He's not making a fuss. He's not saying anything. And look, let me just be clear and say, I really like Todd Stevens in terms of the way he's presented himself. He just seems like a nice guy, who's helpful and friendly and just all the things you'd want to see out of a Magic player, at least as far as the public persona that anyone would have gotten to know listening to him wherever he popped up. Having said that, that doesn't mean he's innocent of whatever happened. And going a step further, it's hard to say whether he did do something or didn't do something when frankly we don't really know what that something even is. We just kind of know generically there was some kind of sexual harassment. That's pretty vague. So anyone who's going to rush out to defend him on that overly, that's probably not a great move, because it doesn't look like Todd's interested in defending himself at this point. Not to mention you don't even know what you're defending. So I think if you're someone who appreciates the contributions that Todd Stevens has made, then probably a better thing to do is just to offer some kind of support in terms of not condoning whatever it is he allegedly did, but just saying you appreciate the contributions he made in the past. Or talking about how maybe 3 years is excessive, but even that is hard to say for sure without actually knowing what happened. Anyway, I think one of the interesting hot takes, it took a lot of setting up to get here, but my hot take is I think the community should get to know more about what happened, but not for the reasons that you might think, right? So obviously in this information internet age, a lot of people want more information. If we hear about an allegation of some kind of sexual misconduct that results in somebody getting fired and then banned, well, we kind of want to know what's going on. We want a little more details. We want to know who was involved, what actually happened, what the allegations are, so on and so forth. And there's a very reasonable response that says, look, all you nosy Nancy's are not entitled to get to know all this stuff. y'all should butt out, okay? Just because we live in an internet era where information's everywhere doesn't mean that everybody should get to know about the private doings of a private individual and the inside private aspects of a company and what they do inside their business. And that's all well and good. That's all perfectly fine. But I think that everybody that's involved in participating in Star City Games events has an interest in making sure that their conduct is in compliance with the terms that Star City Games puts out there so that you don't get banned. Now, I know it's unlikely on a practical level that anybody else would get banned in a similar situation, but then again, I don't know. This is where it gets like funky, right? Like, because on the one hand, let's say that we start with this proposition. Let's say that, and I'm just being purely hypothetical here because we don't know. Let's say Todd Stevens was at a party and he starts groping a female inappropriately, and there were multiple accusers. So let's say he's done this on multiple occasions, and let's even say he's been warned before, and now he's being fired and banned from the tour. Now let me just be very clear. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying it's inappropriate. I'm not saying Star City Games did anything wrong. Let me be very clear on that. I don't know. For all I know, they handled it totally appropriately. I have no idea. But where it gets spicy is if I then say that this is very unlikely to happen to anybody else. It's very unlikely that anyone else going to random parties and sexually harassing women will actually be banned from Star City Games events. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, would you hope that if Star City Games found out about other people exhibiting similar behavior, would you hope that they would also come down hard on those people? I guess there may be people out there that would say yes and no. I mean, I guess there's probably a group of people out there that would say, look, if people are sexually harassing women and Star City Games knows about it, they should ban all of those people. And maybe there's another group of people that say, look, Todd Stevens was a big time person, so you don't have to do it to everybody. You just want to send a strong message with the people that are, sort of the leaders of the community and the employees of Star City Games. And this goes in some weird directions, right? Because if you can potentially be banned from a Star City Games event because you were at a party and you groped a female who didn't appreciate it, then Star City Games can ban you for that. I'm not saying that's necessarily right or wrong. I'm just saying I think people have an interest in knowing that's a possibility, right? But if you don't know what Todd Stevens allegedly did, or if this is something that applies to the community at large, you don't know if this is something that could apply to you in the future or not. And all I'm saying is I think people are entitled to notice. I think that before you get banned, you should get to know that that's a possibility. And again, let me be very clear. I'm not defending Todd Stevens. I'm not even saying he didn't have notice. For all we know, he could have been warned. For all we know, he could have been warned multiple times. You'd better straighten up and all this kind of stuff. I'm not going there. I'm just saying for the regular, grinder out there on Star City Games, is it possible you go to a party, you behave, let's just say inappropriately. Let's say it's not even an argument. Let's just say it's a dead set fact that you behaved inappropriately. But maybe not inappropriately enough for police to be called, maybe charges haven't been filed, but could you get banned from Star City Games for that? And maybe for that reason, maybe if you don't know that that's a possibility, like maybe if you figure the worst thing that'll happen if I get too drunk and act like a jerk is my friends will just disown me and I won't get to go to those parties anymore, maybe you go ahead and go to the party. Or maybe you realize, whoa, wait a minute, if I get drunk and act like a jerk at this party, and I, get way too inebriated and sexually harass some women when I shouldn't have. Again, I'm not defending this behavior. Is there a possibility that I could get completely banned from Star City Games events? And maybe that's a meaningful enough dividing line for some people out there that they then decide, you know what? I'm just not going to go to those parties. I'm not going to consume that alcohol. I'm not going to take the risk. Okay? And I know this may sound kind of messed up, right? Like the idea that maybe people make decisions and weigh the odds of putting themselves in a situation where they might do something inappropriate and then weighing the costs and the benefits and all that, and maybe we could all just say, well, people should just not do bad things. But I feel like that's really not the world we live in, right? I mean, we don't live in a world of innocent, pristine, angelic people that don't sin, you know what I mean? Like we're all flawed human beings on some level, right? I mean, we all make mistakes, we all do things, and different people have different dividing lines for their behavior. I'm not here to moralize you on that, nor am I here to defend Todd Stevens. I'm just saying I think that Star City Games needs to be very clear on why they fired Todd Stevens. And they don't have to be super clear to the public about that. As long as they've communicated to Todd, that only impacts the people that are going to work for Star City Games. So whatever. But then they've got to take another step to be clear on why they banned Todd Stevens from the tour for 3 years to the rest of the public. At least to make it clear enough as to whether or not your social behavior outside of the game, outside of the tournament venue, are those legitimate grounds. Non-criminal, non-magic related stuff, can that get you banned from the tour? And if the answer is yes, can they be a little more specific so people know where the dividing line is on what will and won't get you banned? And again, just to be extremely clear, I'm not arguing about that. I'm not even saying whether that's appropriate or not. I'm just saying I think the public has a legitimate interest in knowing where those lines are, knowing what the rules are. Like, I'm not really arguing what the rules should or shouldn't be. I'm just arguing that the public should get to have a clear understanding of what Star City Games rules of behavior and conduct are and whatnot. I'll let other people argue about what those policies and rules should be. I just think they should be clear to the public. And the fact that someone's getting, banned, not because they cheated at a tournament, but maybe because of misbehavior towards a fellow co-employee. Maybe this was a party that happened on Star City Games property. I mean, I don't know. We have no clue. And so, just some clarity on whether or not your behavior outside of a Star City Games event that's not criminal, as far as we can tell, that doesn't actually physically harm anyone in a sense of anybody suffering physical injuries, right? This stuff may have been psychologically scarring, and I'm not underrating that. But again, we just don't know. And I think people have a legitimate interest in knowing. We shall move along. All right, next up, I got my second hot take of the day. Brainstorm Brewery has a podcast. And in one of their recent podcasts, by the way, this is typically sort of a finance speculation sort of a podcast where they joke around and goof around and they're not too serious. It's a fun podcast. And they had Gavin Verhey, which is one of the senior set designers from Wizards of the Coast. This is kind of a big deal. This is not exactly Mark Rosewater, but this is sort of that next circle surrounding Mark Rosewater of senior game designers. So Gavin Verhey is kind of a big deal. Brainstorm Brewery has him on the podcast. Now, there's a few things I want to mention. The first lesser hot take is Gavin Verhey he just randomly dropped that he's been tinkering with some Pauper decks, having some fun with the format. And the Brainstorm Brewery host asked him literal no questions about Pauper, not even one. And I'm sure that they would probably crack jokes about how stupid Pauper is and how much of a don't give a crap that they have about the format. And I would, perhaps be able to I don't love that position, but at least I can understand it. But for this one thing, they have a segment on their show called Breaking Bulk, where they point out to people a lot of cards that can be found in bulk that are actually worth money. And they've talked about how great Pauper has been for bulk and stuff like that. So I feel like if for no other reason than the fact that Pauper has a real, impact on a lot of cards in the 50 cent to $2 range, they should at least ask a few questions. Ask Gavin, hey Gavin, is there any chance somewhere down the road Pauper could actually be sanctioned as a real format where we could actually see something like a Pauper Grand Prix or something like that? Or what's going to go on exactly with Pauper on Arena? Are we going to see more Arena on Pauper, or I'm sorry, more Pauper on Arena, whatever? And is this going to basically mean that eventually we'll see standard Pauper other places? Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't even matter what it is. Just a little token for the Pauper community that listens to the Brainstorm Brewery would have been nice. Clearly, Brainstorm Brewery could care less, but I wish, for future reference, if nothing else other than the financial implications, maybe they could pretend for like 5 seconds like they care. The part about this is super painful, is at the end of the interview, Gavin Verhey makes it very clear he's willing to take more questions. He's like, hey, I can hang out. Any more questions? Are you sure you don't have more questions? And they're like, I don't know. If we kept you any longer, which you seem eager to do, we'd have to get all the way down to asking questions about Popper. Nah, screw it. It's not even worth it. Just not even going to try. So having said all of that, if you haven't checked out Brainstorm Brewery, go check it out. They have some unique and interesting insights when it comes to finance. And that's where I get my really fun hot take that you're not going to hear anywhere else. So Wizards of the Coast has this long-standing bit where they refuse to acknowledge that their cards are worth money. This is going to sound weird to people, but Wizards obviously believes that the sealed products that they sell are worth money. It would be a little ridiculous to put something for sale for $4 or $30 or $87 and then go publicly and say, no, these things are not worth anything. You can't really do that, because when you're asking people to pay you $80 for a product, you can't then turn around and say this product is not worth $80. That would sort of undercut your own message. So instead, Wizards takes this weird position that basically a box of Magic cards is worth $100 or whatever at the time that it's being sold, but after it's opened up, it's not really worth anything. They just refuse to acknowledge that these cards actually have value in the secondary market, which is a bizarro land, out of touch with reality, ridiculous thing. So why do they do it? I mean, they're not complete morons, despite what some people might say in criticizing them. Well, Wizards feels like legally they're better off to just deny and ignore that these cards have value for a number of reasons. I'll just give you a couple, but there's actually a lot of different nuances that creep in. So the first one is the fact that they want to stay away from the implications of gambling. If you talk about how these cards have a legitimate monetary value and you're going to pay $3 or $4 for a booster pack, and you could open up 50 cents worth of value, or you could open up $80 worth of value, and it's just a crapshoot, well, it kind of looks like you're selling lottery tickets. And that is something that Wizards of the Coast wants to avoid like the plague. On the other end of the spectrum of things that could pop up, Wizards of the Coast has taken a stand that there are certain cards that they will not reprint. Most people know this as the reserve list. And, Wizards generally seems to be sticking to the notion that they're not going to reprint cards from the reserve list. But from time to time, they've done things like put out a special foil judge promo version of a card on the reserve list. And, that means there's been some, mild wiggling there. And also from time to time, people like to float the idea of, hey, maybe someday they'll abandon the reserve list. Well, if they've now represented the reserve list and later on they abandon it, they could get sued. And I know this sounds crazy, but they could get sued by a bunch of collectors holding millions of dollars of reserve list cards, saying, look, you cost us all this money. You cost us all this money when you started reprinting our cards, because these cards were worth a ton of money. My Black Lotuses and my Moxes were all worth a lot of money. You started reprinting them, you crushed the value, and you promised me you wouldn't do this, and because you misled me, and because these are worth money, and you've hurt that value, you've got to pay me some damages. And Wizards of the Coast, they want to probably hedge their bets and be able to be like, oh no, these aren't really worth anything. And there's all kinds of other weird fringy things going on that sort of tie in at the end of the day to WotC trying to limit their liability. And they've probably got some attorneys that are advising them that this is a good way to go. The only problem is, I think at the end of the day, if this was actually litigated in a court, the idea that Magic cards are not worth money is just ludicrous. And the attorneys that are advising them on this, or did back whenever, probably meant well, but there's just no way that's going to hold up. It's just not. There's established markets, TCG Player. There's tons of vendors. These cards are bought and sold. There's probably billions of dollars that are being floated around in terms of purchases and sales every year. So the notion that these cards aren't worth anything is just not going to hold up. And I think Wizards would be in a better position if they just get in touch with reality instead of trying to hold on to lying about this to limit their liability. They should just tell the truth, because they're not limiting their liability at all. Having said that, if you're going to lie about it, don't do things that are going to undermine the position that you're taking. And what I mean by that is, Brainstorm Brewery is a show that the episode before Gavin Verhey showed up, they were talking about the dollar values of cards. And then the episode after Gavin Verhey appears, they're talking about the dollar value of cards. Now, if you're a high-level, important representative of Wizards of the Coast, and you show up to a podcast where they frequently talk about the dollar values of cards, and then you show up and give legitimacy to that show, I mean, that just blows my mind. Now, the Brainstorm Brewery podcast members were very respectful. They were very careful to not refer to certain situations like a card being reprinted and that driving the price down, or how some people were complaining that the most recent 2018 Commander sets didn't have enough cards that actually had legitimate value. They didn't basically say, "Hey Gavin, why don't you throw a $20 card into this Commander deck? What the heck? You raised the MSRP by $5. Why don't you jam a $20 card in there?" They were very careful to avoid that. You know, we will see this in a number of areas with GP coverage and when they go on Brainstorm Brewery. You know, I'm sure arrangements have been made that conversations will revolve around value is a word that will be used, collectability, desirability, but we will not talk in terms of the actual monetary value. We won't say the word dollars. But this is so stupid when all these episodes of Brainstorm Brewery that came before clearly talked about the values of cards, and the ones after talk about it. And you can even find episodes before this where they're literally talking about the values of Commander cards and why aren't there cards in here that are, you know, maybe throw in a $20 card or a few more $10 cards or something like that. And then you have Gavin Verhey on here, and you speak in terms of, well, why wasn't there more value? Everyone knows what's being said. And the fact that they're going out of their way to use doublespeak, and again, I don't blame Brainstorm Brewery for this. I don't blame Gavin Verhey for this. Gavin Verhey is a brave man to go on Brainstorm Brewery and get asked some hard questions. What I'm just saying is, it's Wizards of the Coast, just dumbfounding, facepalm. You just don't go on Brainstorm Brewery or any finance-related podcast and give legitimacy to that kind of a medium if you're going to stick to this inane line that Magic cards are not worth anything in the secondary market and you refuse to acknowledge it. Because what they're doing is they're giving acknowledgement. So, again, Gavin Verhey, great guy, really cool. Tip my hat to him. Much respect. Brainstorm Brewery, great podcast. Tip my hat. Great job, whatever. But Gavin Verhey going on Brainstorm Brewery with the current position that Wizards of the Coast is taking is just mind-numbing. Anyway, I hope you had a good one. Let me know what you think. If you find these particular insights that, frankly, I don't know if you're going to get anywhere else. I think these are pretty unique hot takes. It's not the standard. Just a lot of the places you're going to go listen and you're going to get people's takes on this stuff. It's going to be very formulaic. You could almost predict what they're going to say based on the prior content that they've put out. I feel like the analysis that I'm presenting here on both of these topics, both on Todd Stevens and Gavin Verhey's appearance on Brainstorm Brewery, I feel like these are some very nuanced and creative analysis of the situation. So let me know if you think that's cool and you like it and you want to hear some more of this kind of stuff, just let me know. Or if you think this is terrible and you don't want me to put any content like this out, also just let me know. Either way, I hope everybody has a great time, and hopefully you're piling up that store credit at your local tournament winnings, and or stacking up those tickets on Magic Online, and or getting tons of free packs on Arena, because you're killing it. And in the meantime, have a great time, keep up the great work, and we'll catch you next time on MTG Budget Magic. Peace!